Part 6. 33.
This is not an ordinary business meeting,
Elmo Shepard announced through the impassive face of his Metatron.
Do not be deceived by its mundane aspect. The conference table, the pitcher of water, you men and women in business attire. We are doing eschatology here, practicing it the way some people do yoga.
Corvallis actually didn't think it seemed so mundane. Yes, it was a fairly conventional conference room in the offices of one, but the table was dominated by a live updated display of the landform. A year and a half had passed since the LVU, the Landform Visualization Utility, had first been unveiled at Actans 3. During that time it had changed its general shape very little, but the algorithms had improved. More data now flowed into them. The landform could now be mapped with higher precision and greater certainty. Its finer contours had undergone changes. There were no getting around the fact that these changes were exactly the sort of improvements they'd have expected Pluto to make. He had gone there. He had killed himself to fix the place up. And he was doing it. Still, Corvallis had doubted the evidence of his own eyes until Sophia had drawn his attention to the tower in the middle of the park. People had stopped using scare quotes. It was no longer a tower in a park, but a tower in the park, as anyone could plainly see. She had shown Corvallis a photo she had taken several years ago of the park in the middle of the Iowa town where Richard had grown up. A similar tower was right in the middle of it. There was simply no denying the fact that the processes that had been spawned to simulate the brains of Egdod and of Pluto now inhabited a world that they had created in accordance with how they thought a world ought to look. They had learned how to allocate memory in the cloud for storing that world's map. There was even evidence that they were using other kinds of resources, clusters of high-performance processors, to simulate its wind and its waves. And if that was true for those two processes, presumably it was true for all of the others as well. Thousands of them now.
I am not pleased with what is going on, said the Metatron. This is not the way it was supposed to happen.
By it, what do you even mean, El? Zula asked.
You know perfectly well.
Yes, I think I do. But by just talking about it, as though we all have some shared notion of what it was supposed to be, you're kind of pulling a fast one. We need to unpack this it you speak of. Here El might have got a word in edgewise had he been sitting in the room, but the time lag between Flanders and Seattle spoiled his cadence. Zula went on. I first encountered you in the days after my uncle's death, when, against my will, I had to take a little crash course on utopians and cryonics and all of that stuff. I had heard about the idea of the singularity, read articles about it, but never met anyone who actually believed in it seriously enough to plan for it. Since then, you and I and Corvallis and Sophia and St. John and Jake and so many others have devoted significant portions of our careers to working on the nuts and bolts of it. We haven't had a whole lot of conversations about the big picture, why we're actually doing this, what is the goal. So when you say, this is not the way it was supposed to happen, I tend to think you're envisioning a big picture that maybe the rest of us don't share. Maybe you should share it with us.
I already have, in a sense,
the Metatron said,
when I mentioned that we are doing eschatology here.
End of the world type stuff? Corvallis asked.
What is humanity's ultimate destiny? That is my preferred definition,
El returned.
The timeless preoccupation of great religions, except that prophets and theologians didn't have any factual information to work with. We have facts. We can actually do this. We can decide what our ultimate destiny is, and we can put it into effect. We are the first people in history to whom that choice, that power, has been given. And I'm not going to see us blow the opportunity.
Who says we're blowing it? Zula asked. We don't know what's going on in the landform. Maybe it's the Garden of Eden. Maybe it's terrific there.
Maybe it's a digital North Korea, El countered. Whatever it is, it looks like a simulation of an Earth-like environment. We can't really tell what goes on there. People, processes, seem to be concentrated in a thing that looks like a town. They communicate with each other, or so it appears. Other processes locate themselves in other parts of the landform. If you'll let me have the table, I'd like to show you the results of some network analysis that one of my teams has been running. Take it away, Zula said. The landform faded. One of El's techies, physically in the room, gestured in the air, and brought into being an abstraction. A constellation of colored objects hovering in space above the table. Thousands of small white blobs, like aspirin tablets, were crowded into the lowest few inches of the display, just above the surface of the table. These were webbed together by countless gossamer strands. Above them floated perhaps 24 larger balls, color-coded according to a scheme El hadn't explained yet. Surmounting the whole thing was a big yellow sphere about the size of a grapefruit. Radiating down from it were many fine golden rays linking it to some of the big objects hovering just below it. We can't eavesdrop on the actual content of messages being exchanged between processes, El said. But we can get a general idea of which talks to which. What you're looking at is the output of a network analysis system. It shows who talks to who and how often. And some trends are obvious. Forgive a basic question, Corvallis said, but each of these objects represents a different process? A soul, as it were? Yes, and the lines drawn between them show what we believe to be communication. Why are some so much larger than others? Their size is proportional to how many resources they use, how much memory, how much processing power. Okay, so clearly, we have a whole lot of little tiny ones that talk to each other all the time, Corvallis said, skating his hands through the lower stratum, which looked like aspirin tablets trapped in a cobweb. Yes, the vast majority of individual processes fit that profile. But above it you see the fat cats, the resource hogs. The huge yellow one on top is the first process that Sophia spawned back at Princeton. Dodge's brain, Zula said. Yes, though its connectome has changed so much since then that, for all we know, it might have very little in common with Dodge at this point. But it built the park, with the tower, Zula pointed out, then shook her head impatiently. Sorry. Go on. In between, you've got the Pantheon. Come again? This is my term for a group of 20 or so processes that impose a disproportionate load on the system. They consume a lot of resources. Most of the 9 MFN processes are there, including the one simulating Verna Braden's connectome, which is second only to Dodge's brain. They and some of the Ephrata 11 got an early start. They grew rapidly. Pluto? The big purple one, El said. And to be fair, a few of mine are in there too. Of yours? You know what I mean. Clients of my organization, scanned using my devices, uploaded through my network. Zula got up and walked around the table, viewing the display from different angles. If this is correct, I'm seeing that Dodge talks to Verna, to Pluto, to the other members of what you're calling the Pantheon, but he almost never talks to the little guys. The little guys talk to each other a lot, Corvallis observed, and they have some contact with members of the Pantheon. Some more than others, Jake observed. Verna's not talking to the little guys at all, but some of the other angels have lots of contact. Angels? El asked sharply. Jake smiled. My preferred term for what you are calling members of the Pantheon. Zula was holding out one hand toward Jake, as if holding him back, beseeching him not to plunge into a debate about angels versus gods. But El broke in. Zula, I notice you're standing pretty close to the green shape now. The one you identify with Verna, if I'm not mistaken, Zula said, nodding. What about it? Take a close look. and let me know what you see."
Zula leaned in close and wrinkled her nose. "Around Verna, I can see a bunch of tiny little motes. Just pinpricks of green. Like fruit flies hovering around a watermelon. Faint lines connecting them to the Verna blob. What do those represent?"
"I don't know," El said. "And that is what concerns me. Actually, it's one of many things about the overall situation that is concerning. But this is new and strictly a Verna-related phenomenon."
"Verna was a hacker. Underappreciated. Never really got her feet under her before the cancer took over her life. Maybe she's up to her old tricks," Corvallis said. "Meaning what?" Jake asked.
"Those tiny motes, the fruit flies, are independent processes that have been spawned recently," El said. "Mind you, they are in no way as complex or as capable as those processes we've set in motion based on full human connectomes. But they run on their own, and we didn't make them. Circumstantial evidence suggests that Verna did."
"To ask a blunt question, who's paying for the computational resources consumed by these new processes?" Zula asked.
"You are," El said, "because your foundation launched the Verna process. And these sub-processes that she has spawned all carry the same holographic signature. The billing therefore goes to you. In a larger sense, though, I support all of this by bringing new computer centers online every day, supporting the R&D, paying the overhead."
"Well, this is fascinating data, if it's for real," Zula said. "I thank you for showing it to us, El. What conclusions do you draw?"
"To begin with, it is clearly a hierarchical structure."
"You've certainly made it appear that way by arranging it in a hierarchy," Zula said dryly.
"Which can be backed up statistically. This is not just me playing games with pictures," El snapped. "The overall picture is that resource usage is utterly dominated by a few mega-processes. They've established the landform. Everyone lives on it. It's just
like the world we're living in now. Is that what you are saying?" Corvallis asked. "Nothing has changed."
"That is my concern," El said. "We had an opportunity to start all over again, to build a new universe in which consciousnesses, entities based on human minds but bigger, better, deathless, can dwell and do whatever they want, free from the constraints imposed by the physical world. Instead of which the first process, got a huge head start and just blindly, stupidly recreated something very much like the world we all live in now. A world that looks to have geography and physics based on the ones that imprison us."
"Maybe we need it," Zula said. "Maybe our brains can't make sense of things otherwise." "It's the Kant thing all over again," Corvallis muttered.
"Say, you're going to have to speak up," El said. "The microphones on this thing still aren't as good as human ears."
"Oh, years and years ago I had a conversation with Dodge about Kant, whom he had never heard of until that point. It was about Kant's idea that space and time were ineluctable to the human mind, that we simply could not think without hanging everything on a space-time lattice, that any attempt to think outside of that framework would produce gibberish. He used it to take down Leibniz." "Do you think it sank in?" Jake asked. "It got him to Google Kant," Corvallis allowed. "It is a common preoccupation of people who think about the idea of heaven," Jake said. "What exactly would it be like to live forever in a realm where physical constraints don't apply, where there is no evil, no pain, no want? Being an angel living on a cloud, strumming a harp 24/7 forever. That could get old. Old enough that it might become indistinguishable from being in hell." Jake wasn't kidding. He had hosted entire conferences about this sort of thing, caused books to be published about it, talked leading scientists into discussing it in public with theologians.
"Fascinating," El said.
He was pretty clearly not fascinated.
"Maybe the rest of you can continue that discussion after I've signed off. Fly to a retreat center in the mountains, invite some archbishops and some hackers, serve wine, impress one another with your big ideas. I don't give a shit. I'm just about out of time." I have supported this more generously than any of you can possibly appreciate. From the very beginning, I was dumping money into it. I've wasted more than anyone else has spent, but I accepted the waste. The fact that I didn't know which 20% of it was actually getting us somewhere, because I knew that I was mortal, and I just didn't want to go out like a sucker, like everyone else who has ever died or will die. I've been hands-off to a degree that isn't appreciated. I've let the beneficiaries of my generosity experiment with ideas that in many cases were frankly unsound. Fine. But these results are troubling to me. Now we have what for me is the last straw. One of these processes, Verna, is spawning new processes. It's a sorcerer's apprentice problem, Corvallis said, nodding. If Verna can do it, others can learn to do likewise, and then the demand for resources goes exponential. The whole thing blows up and runs out of money. When I kick the bucket, I can't even boot up my own process because all of the computers in the world are busy running what Zula likened to fruit flies. So I think it is time for me to take a more active role, a more directive role. How would you like to direct it? Zula asked. El could be heard sighing. His Metatron didn't have the ability to deflate its chest and drop its shoulders, but the little puff of white noise came through clearly. I think they got stuck, he said. Look, the best and the worst thing that ever happened was Sophia turning on Dodge's brain prematurely. She just went for it. If we'd left it in the hands of the academics, 100 years might have passed before that was done, and it would have been done wrong, so it's good, on the whole, that she took the initiative. But the process must have woken up in a confused, disoriented, ill-informed state. I think it just started groping around, trying stuff, not thinking about the big picture, just reproducing whatever qualia brought it comfort, with the results we have seen. The system is stuck in a kind of attractor lock, a reproduction of the old world that is so much less than it could be. It's because the new processes that came along in the wake of the first one just glommed onto what DB was doing and created a feedback loop that reinforced it. You want to break out of that, Zula said. Shake things up. Start from scratch again with a bigger scope. An open mind, at least, to the possibility that these souls, I'll call them souls, could be doing something other than reproducing what they experienced and did and thought in their past lives. Corvallis said, So, what is it you are asking us for, El? What I should have insisted on at the beginning, El said, which is full co-equal Toho status. I want to be a token holder with unlimited administrative privileges on all aspects of these processes. It actually wasn't an unreasonable request from a man who, it had to be admitted, had done more than anyone else to make all of this happen. Which explained the long silence that followed. If he'd asked for something ridiculous, something unfair, they could have scoffed at it. Corvallis spoke first. El, just to be clear, right now, for historical reasons, the only Toho with that level of power is Sophia. She used it to launch the process that, as you've pointed out, now dominates everything else. She has the power to shut that process down, to kill it. If you had equal privileges to hers, you could do the same. Look, see. Think for just a second about what is going on with Verna and the little processes she is spawning, which is about to become your problem because the Forthrest Family Foundation is footing the bill for all of those. What happens when 1 trillion of those get spawned and you run out of money? As you know, that's not what would happen. We would just slow down the speed at which the simulation is running, so that we could keep all of those processes going at whatever burn rate we can actually sustain. A PR disaster, El said. The LVU started out as a research tool, but now it is being watched by millions of people as a form of entertainment. They're fascinated by what is going on in the world of the dead. If you slow it to a crawl, then nothing seems to happen. They lose interest, they stop signing contracts, money stops flowing into the system. We can't add the computing infrastructure that we need. The whole enterprise goes into a death spiral.
I'm not as pessimistic as you are, Corvallis said.
Call it pessimism if you like. Numbers don't lie. These new fruit fly processes have to be terminated.
Look, I'm glad you brought Verna's fruit flies to our attention. We'll keep an eye on them. But that is not what I am talking about, as I think you know perfectly well. I'm talking about the big processes that are based on human connectomes. Processes that we have now given names to, and begun to think of and to talk about as if they were human souls. A Toho with root privs could kill any of those.
You know my thinking on this, see? El returned. More than anyone else in this room, I am of the belief that all of these processes are alive as you or me. As such, I believe that to shut them down would be in every way the same thing as committing murder. So for you to point out that I could kill any one of these processes is true, and yet it's as completely beside the point as for you to point out that in meat space I could hire hitmen to have a person killed.
It took a bit for that to sink in. Jake said, El, are you making abstract philosophical points here, or issuing threats? Corvallis looked across the table at Zula. She looked back at him. On the side of her head that was hidden from the view of the Metatron, she raised her hand, extended her index finger toward her ear, and twirled it around.